Crushcamp, folks. Welcome to Wine Foundry Wednesdays. It's great to be back on. We took a little break for a little while so that we could get ready for harvest and have some Wednesday evenings where we could kind of prep and prepare how to pull this off. For those of you that have never been to the winery during harvest, this is kind of what we wanted to put on for you. Normally, Crushcamp is something that we host on the weekends or every handful of weekends during harvest, where we invite people to the winery. All of our clients are always welcome to come, and it's usually anywhere from a 6 to 8 hour day. We have vineyard components. We take you through varying things that are happening in the winery, and we wanted to try to figure out how to break that into Wine Foundry Wednesdays and do it virtually for you and with you all. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Stu mentioned on the intro, we are focusing on harvest and some of the equipment that makes it go. And then we are going to get into pressing and a bit more. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and encourage everybody that has a bottle of wine in front of them, make sure it's open, make sure your glass is full. My bottle seems broken slightly because it is not full, but we're going to get into it. So Patrick is at Hyde Vineyard, where we are doing our Syrah pick tomorrow at 6 a.m. And he's going to take us into a little bit of kind of what goes into making those calls for when to pick and how the pick happens. So Patrick, are you there?
I am here, Steve. Thank you. So a beautiful Hyde Vineyard in Carneros, Napa. See you around. Hopefully my camera work is as good as my winemaking, which of course is always spot on, as we know. And so this is a beautiful vineyard, right on the way to work, to and from work, obviously. So super convenient too. Well done on the Hydes to position it so wisely on my routes. So so on all the vineyards, really, you know, the main critical part of making wine is the starting material. And so you're walking the vineyards and checking out the fruit, you really need to be considering the taste primarily. But there's a lot of chemistry that goes into it, of course, and we can measure the chemistry by taking samples. And so as I'll walk through the vineyard and grab representative clusters from different portions of the vineyard so that we can get an idea of what the chemistry is. But really, I'm walking it now, and I made that call about a week ago to pick tomorrow morning. And so as you'll see there in the video, what's going to happen is that the guys are going to come in and they're going to hand pick. So we like to hand pick the fruit, and so it does come at a cost. You know, the hand picking grapes is quite expensive because you have labor of people doing it, but you can be way more selective in your choices. A machine pick is not selective, and everything that's there gets taken, and it's a bit more rough on the fruit. And so I'm trying to be as delicate, if you will, of the fruit as possible. Even though we're getting ready to destem the fruit, we still want to bring the fruit in nicely so it's treated with utmost care. And the way to do that is by hand. And so we also wanted to come in as cold as possible, you know, and generally you start off with a cold soak at the beginning of the fermentation. So I want the fruit to come in and to be picked ideally in the middle of the night. Out here in California, it's so ideal every night of the year, including during the harvest. It's down to roughly 50 degrees or so at nighttime. So the grapes are quite cool and at nighttime. And so if you pick in the early hours of the evening or the morning, you're able to capture that in. They come in very cold, and you can start it off, and you don't have to spend a lot of energy, of course. So it's much more friendly on the energy consumption as well to start off with cold grapes. So for many reasons, we want to hand pick the grapes, and we want to get them in as cold as possible. And so that's the way to do it in the middle of the night. It does come at a cost sometimes, especially if you're picking in a mountain vineyard. So now here in Carneros, it's in the valley floor, and so it's not as dangerous as it would be at nighttime. There's still some unevenness for sure, as everyone knows from has ever walked on a farm and walked in a vineyard rows. No, they're not even and flat. So you still have some minor health risks through turning of ankles and knees and so forth. But on areas where it's more dangerous, you want to be careful. So sometimes they'll have to bring in lighting so that you can see extra, or in this case, they might wait till it's sun up and then pick at the first dawn. So Steve, what are you doing now? You getting ready to talk about the press?
Well, no, I was doing my what do they call those things? TRL straps or something. Yeah, I'm actually gonna start with Stu over by the weigh station. But real quick, just as a quick glimpse forward, just because we have some activity here at the winery, I'm gonna ask Claire to show over here. We're doing a barrel down right now. So basically, we're filling these barrels here, and you can kind of see how it's going. We're coming out of tank into these barrels. We'll get more into that on the next, actually on the third one on October 28th. But Stu is over at the scale, and he's going to get into that. And so I was just going to point out, we're going to beg forgiveness for a mild second. If anything's a little glitchy, we have our trusty camera folks here that are holding our cameras while we're on the winery floor trying to bring you guys an authentic look into this. Patrick in the vineyard, all of that, and Shiraz running Command Central. Remember, put your questions into the Q&A or the comments section, which Valerie's monitoring, and she'll be feeding them into us from there. So don't be shy. There's no such thing as a stupid question, only the ones that you don't ask. Stu and Patrick, thank you so much. We know that you have to be up early to get to that pick. So thanks for joining us. And you're welcome to stay on if you want. But if you want to get home and get to bed, that's fine too. And I'll kick it over to Stu at the scale. You getting his audio?
I'm going to do it this time without the Marcel Marceau. I'm going to be on mic. Patrick, when he was doing it, he mentioned the early morning picks and some dangers with it. We were at our Cabernet Franc pick on Monday morning, and driving up there and then trying to find our block of fruit before the sun, four-wheeling, almost driving off the cliff a couple of times. Very exciting. Now, so tomorrow morning, after we pick that fruit at Hyde, and we'll start picking around 6, then the fruit will come here. And Hyde Vineyard's only 10 minutes from the winery. The first thing before any of the real action happens is the scale. So right behind me, I have the scale, and we're not going to look at how much it weighs right now. And there's 3 reasons why we weigh the fruit. Number 1, the growers have to be paid. So we want to make sure that they are paid according to the weight. Number 2, California Department of Agriculture is really interested in something called taxes. And so they will find their way of helping us part with some money based on our tonnage. Number 3, we get to figure out how much wine is being made. And we can also kind of do calculations on what additions will be necessary during the fermentation. But we know that when we start, after we weigh the fruit, for each ton on a white grape, we're going to get about 60 cases of wine. And for each red, when you're working with a ton with red grapes, about 55 cases per ton. Once the grapes are weighed, then the path for white wines and the path for red wines diverges. We're going to start with reds. And the first thing we're going to do with reds is we're going to sort the grapes. So we weigh them in, and then what's going to happen is we're going to put the whole clusters, stem and all, up here, and we're going to start sorting the grapes. And Philip, you can follow me along here. You can just carry it on over. And we're going to sort the individual clusters. We usually have a few people over here kind of looking for overripe grapes, underripe grapes, and removing any leaves. Most of the pick is going to be perfectly clean. It's more ceremonial than anything. And then the clusters are going to go up on this beautiful new incline thing that we could talk about shortly, because Steve and Philip invested some nice money in there. And then over here, it's going to go into the destemmer, and that fruit is we're going to be removing the stems or rachis from the berries. And then we're going to sort the berries individually. We have an optical sorter, and Steve will be able to talk about that in greater detail. And then once they're sorted, those berries are going to go into tank where we're gonna chill them down. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, and initiate fermentation. This year, or in recent years, we've picked up some pretty amazing equipment. I'm going to turn it over to Steve. Steve, if you could talk to us about the destemmer and then our optical sorter, that would be great information to have. Thanks.
Thank you, Stu. I think Sharath might have a video of the sorting queued up there. And so if you want to kind of talk, Sharath, if you could show the video on sorting just so that folks can see what Stu was talking about, that would be great before I get into that. And while you're pulling that up, okay, it's going. Okay, so basically here what's happening is the fruit is coming in. That's a half-ton macro bin. That's what the fruit's picked into. Dumping it into the big hopper. And from there, it's going to go along what we call a cluster sorting line, which is right here. So from there, we can pick out any leaves, lizards, snakes, frogs. I'm only partially joking about some of those. But we pick out anything in there that, that we don't want getting through, or usually it's really more like raisin clusters. Going up to the grape elevator there that Stu mentioned. And that's going to take us into our next spot, which is the stemmer. So Sharath, you can go ahead and pause that video there, or stop that video there if you don't mind, and bring me back onto the screen. We do have a question from Heather. We do see your question, Heather, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But over here, and excuse me while I grab this ladder. Why don't you, Claire, if you could come up on this side. Let me put my wine glass down too. Go ahead and climb on up. I'll move my jacket. So we're gonna go ahead and give you the inner workings here. This is, we call it the Pelonk because it's made by a company named Pelonk. So in here, this is the destemmer. So formerly, we bought this in 2015, and formerly, we used to have something that was basically, it was a cylinder. The destemmers were a cylinder. If you think of like the cylinder in your dryer, where the grapes would go around in a circle, and there were paddles that would come through and just smack the berries off the grapes or off the rachis. And that was a little bit aggressive. Still very common practice to be used now. But what the technology is nowadays that kind of ultra premium and really high-end wineries are investing in, it's something like this, which is more of an oscillating. So you see these white fins here in the middle. The grapes are going to come in through the very back. These white fins are going to move the clusters through, and then those kind of fingers they have tartrates on them from the tannins in the red wine or the red berries. Those are going to basically guide them through, and the whole thing's going to shake as berries then fall through these holes down onto the next level here, where Claire you can get down to the ground level now. And so if you come up in here, they're going to fall right down through here, and these wheels, they're going to roll through. The berries will fall through the middle, and the stems are all going to kind of sweep through and come out here where we collect them. Now on the next scene, this here is called a shaker table. So this shaker table, anything that's going to fall through here are berries. And Sharath, if you could start that video again at that spot right before it gets on the blue conveyor. You might have to back up. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so this is basically how it is in operation. This is obviously empty. And it just kind of shows you how it's going to come through. I'm not sure. Okay, these are still photos, I see. So that's the MOG, the material other than grapes coming through. And here are the berries coming down. So it's a little bit of a slow-mo video. And these are falling onto the shaker table. Now the shaker table, you'll notice when we come back to the live stream here, which you can go ahead, Sharath, and come back live. So the shaker table vibrates back and forth. It literally shakes. That's a very appropriate name for it. And it's got these holes here, which Claire will show the fins in the back, which are going to kind of guide the piles of berries in different directions so that there is evenly dispersed coming onto this. And this grid right here is in order to, the grid is basically to remove any shot berries, raisins, seeds that might fall through. It basically is kind of a pre-sort, so to speak. And the other reason the table is going to shake side to side is because we want to try to get everything onto one layer as much as possible. And from there, it's going to drop onto our optical sorter. So optical sorters are very cool. There's really no other way to describe it. The technology has been around for decades because they use them in the production and manufacturing of like frozen peas and blueberries and raspberries and all of that. It basically is going to run the berries through this white or the blue conveyor, and then there's a series of cameras. So there's 4 cameras here, and Claire, you can come in up close so that we can kind of show you the cameras here. 4 cameras that are going to be looking for size, shape, and color. And those size, shape, and color parameters are programmed in. And those are things that our winemaking team programs in based on the varietal. For example, Pinot Noir berries are different sizes than Zinfandel berries. So we need to have different parameters. Zinfandel, we might want a little bit more raisin if we want to have a richer, jammier type of style. You know, so we change the parameters based on what we're looking for. And then any berries that do not fit in those parameters, there's a series of 64 jets, hydraulic little air jets here that basically will shoot the bad berries that do not fit our parameters. It kicks them out. So the berries fly through here, and if it doesn't fit or if a leaf makes it through, it'll shoot it out and get rid of it. And, those jets are accuracy. And I think, Sharath, you've got a video of the optical sorter in action. Is that correct, I believe? Is the video going? Nope. Okay. Well, then I'll keep talking. So, okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay. Oh, we got the slow-mo. So you can hear it as they fly through a little bit. Now, each one of those little things, it sounds like a shot. Ooh, there's a leaf. It's going to go. All right. All right, that's perfect, Sharath. Thank you. So on the downside, on the delivery side of the optical sorter, that's where we're either going to have a bin if it's a very small ferment, and we can take that bin and then dump it into the tank, or we can ferment it in bin, or we take it into this must auger hopper, and it's going to be hooked up to a Francesca pump, which is Francesca is a brand in Italy. It basically means extremely expensive pump that only has like 3 uses, but costs a lot of money. And that's because it's so gentle on the must, and must is the grapes. And that's going to push it to whichever tank we want to go to. So there are a couple of questions that I want to go ahead and answer here before we kind of push on to the next step. And one was from, do you mind if I borrow that? One was from Heather. So this is going back onto the picking with the bricks. And she asked, if you pick with the bricks at number, say, 22, is it possible for the number to continue to go up after picking? And if so, how much? So Heather, yes, we could pick at, say, 22. When we bring the fruit in, we're going to go ahead and process it. And then about a day after it's in tank, we'll measure the bricks again. And it will usually, with reds especially, we'll say, oh, it's soaked up to 23.2, or, you know, it's going to go up maybe a degree, maybe 1.5 degrees here or there, depends. But again, Patrick kind of mentioned this when he was in the vineyard, we're really going on flavor, because the bricks is the sugar level. We can adjust that. We can add water. We can add concentrate if we needed to. We don't usually. We can do a lot of different winemaking techniques to do that. Same thing with pH or something. We can add acid. We can remove acid, but we can't change flavor. So that's why we always check on the flavor. So hopefully that answered your question. I'm going to go ahead to a question from Gray. And Gray asks, or excuse me, Gary, I'm sorry. How do you decide whether to do whole cluster fermentation or partial? And is it useful for both reds and whites? So Gary, I'm going to kind of answer this really quickly, but we're going to get to it on the October 14th issue when we talk about our episode, when we talk about fermentation. And so it's really a stylistic decision. And we're always going to do it. We're always going to do whites one way without whole cluster. On reds, we may incorporate some. It just depends on what the goal is for the wine. And I think there's a third question here, but oh, there's a bunch, excuse me. So I'm going to just table these next two until we kind of get on to the next section here. So give me 1 second. And I think we're going to get Stu back in here.
Yeah.
Stu, are you there?
I certainly am, Steve. Thank you so much. So after we go through the sorting, then we're preparing the grapes for fermentation. And this is we're going to kind of touch upon that question about the Brix levels, the sugar levels going up and why that happens. So Steve talked about that fancy pump. What's going to happen is we're going to put it in one of the tanks around the winery. We have a number of different kinds of tanks. We have, right now I'm sitting in what we refer to as the tank farm, and these are closed top tanks. And what we're going to do on these is during the fermentation cycle is we're going to do something called a pump over, but we also have open top fermenters, and it just depends on the style. But before initiating fermentation, we're going to do something called a cold soak. So the grapes will go into a tank. For example, right here, I have 2020, it's the 2020 vintage Cabernet Sauvignon from a vineyard called Melrose Vineyard up in Rutherford. And this is farmed by a friend of ours, Andy, a very noted grower here in Napa Valley. And the grapes were picked on the 16th. So we're not going to initiate fermentation straight away for a number of reasons. First of all, we've put several tons of grapes in here, 3.5 tons of grapes, and we picked them at a certain Brix level and chemistry level. But when that grapes first came in, we didn't have a lot of data. So by having all 3.5 tons of grapes in this bin, and it will soak for a few days, then we'll be able to get a more accurate sugar level. And the question before was, do the numbers go up? They do, but it's just the way we get the data. Since we don't have a lot of data early on, we have an idea of what the Brix are, but once these 3.5 tons of grapes are kind of sitting together and they're releasing their sugars, it seems like the Brix are going up, but it's just the way we can get the measurement more accurate. What we're going to do is when we first put them in here, we're going to dial the temperature way down. And the reason for that is we don't want it to ferment right away. Hence the name cold soak or cold maceration. We will do a different length of cold soak or cold maceration depending on the style and grape varietal. This Cabernet Sauvignon, we're probably only going to do a cold soak for maybe 48 hours. Number one, get that data so that we can make more informed decisions. The other thing is, if it's not fermenting, what we're doing is fermentation is going to last 5 to 7 days. It's really quick. And we can only extract color and flavor for a portion of that time. And then after that, it's just the yeast eating the sugar. So by doing this cold soak, cold maceration, and having that 3 tons, 5 tons, 8 tons of grapes smushing against each other, we're actually cheating Mother Nature in getting a little more extraction. So this wine is fermenting, but I'm just going to take a little taste. I'm going to take it off this little cheater valve right here. So I'm pulling out, the reason it's coming out so slowly is that there's a lot of skins in there, and the skins are where we're getting our color and flavor. But I have some of the juice. You can see that it's kind of cloudy, and it's because there's all the skins in there, all the proteins, all the particulate matter. And now that it's started to ferment, we've increased that temperature to help the yeast do its thing. But the takeaways from cold soak or cold maceration: better data so we can make more informed decisions. And number two, cheat Mother Nature by squeezing out more color, more flavor from those skins. Now, briefly, somebody was kind of mentioning about stem inclusion and stuff like that. Steve indicated, yes, we'll be getting into that in more detail. But for some grapes, we might do a cold maceration, Pinot Noir, that might extend out for Pinot, for example, 5-7 days, as long as possible, because those skins are so thin that we kind of want to maximize that time. But once the yeast starts going on its own, we're going to jack up that temperature and start fermenting. So that is cold maceration. Now, we've been talking about red grapes. And when we first started, when we were over at the scales, I said, once the grapes come in, they take two different paths. Red grapes get sorted, white grapes take a different path. White grapes, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to take the grapes straight from the pickers in those bins. And what we're going to do is we're not going to use the skins, so the grapes are going to go directly in the press. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Steve, who's going to talk about the press. And then I'm going to head out to the barrel room, and we'll join up with you guys in a few minutes. Steve, you ready?
I'm ready, buddy. Thanks, Stu. This is really strange not being able to see what's happening on the screen. I have no idea, like, if things are frozen. It's like a control freak thing. It's very, very weird. So I'm going to assume this thing is on and that we're going. So here's the press. I'm standing in front of our Euro press. This is a bladder press. There essentially are two different styles of pressing. One is a basket press, which is if you want to be super delicate on wine, and generally it really has to be kind of smaller lots. You'll see it sometimes with very mild Syrah, maybe in the Rhone region. You're not going to see it usually with California Syrah. You'll see it a little bit, definitely in Burgundy, and with Pinot Noirs. You'll see it in a lot of Oregon Pinot Noirs as well, just because they're a little bit more restrained and kind of a different approach than where you find California's Pinot Noirs. Bladder press is a bit of more of a workhorse. It's definitely what you want for Bordeaux varieties, and about 70% of what we produce here, being in Napa, is Bordeaux varieties. So the bladder press is essentially this big round cylinder that's on its side, and you see the screens on the side of it, and inside of that is a big canvas balloon, and it's a bladder, and it's gonna fill up with air. So Sharath, you have the video there, I think, of the interior of the press, which is actually super cool. So it looks like you're just going up and exploring somebody's artery or something, but basically you'll see the screens on there, and the bladder is going to be on the other side. That bladder is going to expand. We dump the fruit in the top of the hopper, and then the bladder is going to start expanding 0.2 bar throughout the whole cycle until a maximum of either 1.2 bar, 1.4 bar, sometimes 1.6. Depends on the winemaker's ideals of what they want to extract out of it. And by the way, a bar is equal to 1 atmosphere, which is equal to 14.5 pounds per square inch. So in the US, we always talk about PSI. 14.5 PSI is 1 bar. So we're going up to like 16 PSI at the 16 point something. Math isn't too good on the uptick at the full weight of it. And basically that's squeezing the juice out of the berries, leaving the skins behind. On the white wines, everything will drain down into, you can cut the video, Sharath, yeah? Okay. Thank you. So am I back on, Claire? All right. So if you come over here, Claire, oh, no, we're not back on. Okay. well, I have no idea what's going on the screen, but I'll keep talking about pressing. So the white grapes are in there. We squeeze the juice out of them. The juice is then transferred into a tank where we will let it settle out for 1 to 2 days, sometimes maybe 3. Basically, that's getting any heavy particulate matter out of there. And we're going to, okay. So a couple people are trying to motion to me. I have no idea what they're saying. Are we on the screen, Claire? No? Okay, just 1 sec, folks. Yeah, we are. Okay. I think we're on the screen. Oh, okay. If Val, if everything's fine, will you send Claire a text, please, to say everything's fine, or that we need to figure something else out? So I'm going to keep talking here. So we're at the press, and this is the drain pan right down here. So in the drain pan, you can see in here, basically, the juice is going to drain down at the bottom of the press into this pan, where we're going to hook up a hose to a pump to another hose going to a tank. And then in that tank, if it's a white wine, we're going to let it settle for 1 to 2, maybe in rare occasions 3 or 4 days. And that's really where we get heavy particulates out. We're going to chill the tank down, low 50s, sometimes maybe 48 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's going to help precipitate out proteins, any bits of skin that may have gotten in there. That's all going to drop out. And then after that, we're going to rack the tank. Racking is a winemaking term that means moving from one vessel to another. We're going to rack the tank into another tank, and then we'll inoculate and start fermentation. And if it's on a red wine, then we're doing that after fermentation. And so we'll get to that when we get to the fermentation episode on October 14th. Before I jump off, I'm gonna run through a couple more questions here that we've got. Dave, 2021 is going to be the first vintage with us. Awesome. Can't wait for you guys to do this. Come to Napa a handful of times a year. The best part, the most interesting part of the winemaking process, what Stu and I would recommend to come to, hands down, is the blending session. If you can only choose one piece of the winemaking process to be physically here at the winery, it's the blending session, which should absolutely be, hey Stu, can you mute, by the way?
Yes.
Thank you. The blending session is by far and away the most interesting. It's also a ton of fun, but it's the most interesting and educational component. You'll learn so much. You'll learn how literally 0.25% of another variety can totally change the wine. So that would be what it would be. Heather asks, when we say gentle on the grapes, and I think this is going back to being more gentle on the stemmer, the pellant that we looked inside. Is that because of the seeds? It can be, yeah, but it's also just, we want to keep the berries intact. And you used to crush grapes. They would literally go through 2 rollers that were very close together, and it would kind of crack the berries open. Now we don't really do that anymore. It's basically been found that for really high-end winemaking, you want to keep them intact. You want to keep them whole. They're going to macerate on their own. There's actually some level of carbonic maceration and carbonic fermentation that would happen within that, which is basically where the fermentation is going even inside the berry and causing those berries to kind of explode on their own. So that's the main reason we want to do that. Seeds, you do want to be gentle on seeds, though, to answer your question more directly. There are tannins in seeds that can be off-putting. So whether we're handling the must in any form, we want to be gentle and wary of not crushing the seeds, basically. Jonathan asks, how long is the fermentation process for reds as opposed to whites? That's a great question. And we'll talk about this a lot more on our October 14th episode. Red fermentations, for the fermentation itself, it could be anywhere from 4 to 9 days. Where it's going to be in tank longer than that, between the cold soak or / cold maceration that Stu mentioned, as well as an extended maceration, which we'll also talk about on a future episode. Whites, we usually do we call it slow and low. So we will ferment very low temperature, very slowly, and those white ferments can take anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks. So that just depends on that. Heather asks, cold soak equals super soak. That would rinse the natural yeast, right? So I'm assuming using a purchased yeast is preferable. No, not at all, Heather. There's native yeast everywhere, right? So they're on the grapes when they come in. We're not, when we cold soak the wine, as Stu is talking about, the grapes are just soaking in their own juices. So it's not like we rinse them and we put them into water. They're soaking in their own juices. It's basically like you take a bowl of blueberries and you sprinkle some sugar on them and they macerate in their own juices. We don't sprinkle the sugar, but we just take it and it macerates on its own, and that's the cold soak. So the yeast is still in there. We do try to go native a lot. We also probably have our own native yeast here in the winery because so many different yeasts are here. But we do inoculate with commercial available yeast as well. He's on the screen. Okay. I don't think that was a question.
And Steve,
yeah,
if you need any help with questions, because I don't want you to lose your voice, because tomorrow you are performing in La Boheme, and your role is so important in that opera tomorrow. If you need me to take some questions, man, you can lock them over here.
You got it. Thank you. The nice thing is that tomorrow night I'll be at a much higher register, so I can totally pull it off. So I appreciate the concern, though.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will.
Stu, you're over in the barrel room.
I am, and we're about to have I'm standing right by the Sauvignon Blanc. You guys are tasting the 2020. We're about to have a little forklift action over here, so it's good. So we'll hear the beeping, but then it's going to go away. So we're moving barrels that are fermenting in here, the white. So everyone, or a number of you, are tasting the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc.
Hey, Stu.
Yes.
Can you tell your cameraman to turn your video on, please?
Can you turn my video on? Okay. Is that better? The light has been turned.
Yep.
We were in the barrel room in the dark, and it was very awkward. So,
okay.
All right. So now you guys at home are tasting the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc. Okay. Here we have the 2020s. So a few weeks ago, a number of us from the winery were out at the vineyard at before sunrise for the pick. And then we went through that process that Steve just talked about. We pressed the grapes, and then we did what's called it's not really a cold soak, but we're doing kind of a cold settling. We take that juice that came out of the press for the white wine, and we let it stay in a tank for 24 to 48 hours to let those heaviest particulates come out. And then once they settled out, we racked the wine, like Steve said, to different vessels. For Sauvignon Blanc, it's pretty cool. We ferment 3 different ways, those same grapes. So just under 2/3 of that goes into one of those stainless steel tanks that we were standing by before. And those bars that are on those tanks, that has glycol passing through there so that it's not touching the grapes, but it allows us to dial in the temperature right where we want. And then we also ferment in our concrete egg. About 1/3 goes into one of our eggs, and the egg has a slightly different palate presence. And then we take 2 barrels and we put them in what's called neutral oak. I'm kind of surrounded by a lot of oak barrels here. You'll hear one new oak, once used oak, twice used oak. Well, the moral of the story is the first time you use an oak barrel, you get so many sensory characteristics from that oak barrel. It really impacts the aroma and the flavor. It could overpower a Sauvignon Blanc. So what we do is we use barrels that have been used, and so now we're not going to get any of the oak aromatics or oak flavors, but because the wood is permeable, wood is allow a little bit of oxygen contact, the wine is a little bit richer, rounder. So when you sit down at the blending table, we have stainless steel, we have egg, we have oak. We also, when we barrel down, So this barrel right here is a combo of stainless steel and egg. And then we'll put that into steel. And we'll also sometimes do a combo of stainless steel and egg and put that into oak. So we have numerous permutations when you sit down for your SB, Sauvignon Blanc. In the industry, we say SB. When you're sitting down for your blending trials, you have a little bit of this, you have a little bit of this, and you work through those various iterations. And that's why, to the question that was asked earlier, if there's something you're going to do, the best part is blending. Because to see the impact that a 0.5% or a 1/4% has is fascinating. What I'm going to do is I have in here what's called a fermentation bung, because it's still kind of, it's basically what we would say dry. Basically, the sugar is eaten up, but there's still a lot of gases coming out. So I have a 2-part fermentation bung, which will allow those gases to come out. If I sealed the wine, oh boy, if I opened it up, those gases would explode. And I can actually, if Philip, if you can kind of come on over here, you can see a wine that is fermenting. We've got some stuff we don't, but if you kind of zoom in here, you'll see that the juice is coming out of the top. And if I open this up, a lot more is going to come out. So it's just the gases, the CO2 is seeping through that firm bung or that fermentation bung. Once fermentation is complete, we're going to put what's called a hard bung in there. So then it's sealed, and because we're not going to need any of those gases. But I thought it'd be fun to taste the 2020 interpretation of the Sauvignon Blanc. I have my thief. And going in, at home you can do the same with a straw. And I'm going to show you what the wine looks like right now, because you're going to see it's not done. And I'll come on over and I'm going to give a little bit to the camera person too, because they've been working really, really hard and they own the winery. All right. So I was just thieved it out, and you're going to see that there's a whole bunch of particulate matter still in here. That is important. So there's yeast in here. There's still pieces of skin. And what we're going to do is, we'll get into this later, but we're going to keep on suspending this lees into the wine, but depending on what the goal is for that particular wine. This is a combo of the egg and stainless. So what that is going to do is going to give us a little more broader palate presence. And so we want to kind of resuspend the lees every few days to help build that mouthfeel. Once we have that palate presence that we want, 1 second, Steve. Once we have that palate presence that we want, then we'll get a more clarified wine. What's up, Steve?
Sorry about that. We're usually so in sync, and I jumped in literally about 6 seconds too early. Sorry about that. So lees,
it's okay.
Did you, I may have missed it, but did you explain to folks what lees is?
Okay.
And forgive me if you did.
It's okay. For the third time, no, I'm joking. No, what lees is a combination of the spent yeast, and it can be other particulates that are in there, like in the form of proteins or stuff from the skins, but it's really kind of the spent yeast. And when the fermentation is done, and we're not really going to get into, I'm going to kind of allude to something right now, but we're going to get into this much more in our 4th session, but something called malolactic conversion or malolactic fermentation. But when that bacterial secondary conversion or fermentation takes place, once that's dead, once that's finished, all of those particulates are going to precipitate to the bottom, and there's going to be about a 2 millimeter layer that almost looks like powdered cocoa, but it's the color of the grapes. We refer to that as lees. And you might even see this on some bottles. Like you might see a bottle that says Sir Lee. And that wine, some people feel that if you are aging the wine on the lees, you get more complexity. But that's really a stylistic element. Some people want the wine to be crisp, clean, and light. They want less lees contact. Other people want a wine to be rich, round, and brooding. They would want more lees contact. Steve, did I answer the question for you?
Yeah, that was great. And I also want to point out that somebody requested to see what the egg looks like. So I'm standing in front of the egg right now. We have 2 eggs here, actually. If Claire, if you pan this way, left egg, right egg, gray egg, light gray egg. Literally, look, they're concrete eggs. I mean, there's no other way to go about it. We've got some Malbec in the one on the right, and a little bit of rosé in the one on the right, on the left. So it literally looks like a giant egg. There's actually a fun thing in the wine industry for Easter that a lot of people, it always sneaks up on us, but a lot of people decorate their eggs and then take pictures and send them in, and or send them all around. So, Stu, do you mind if I answer, if I kick a question over to you?
Sure. Give me one that I can't answer. That would be greatly appreciated. And we have a number of eggs here in the barrel room too. I don't know if Philip, if you just want to do a quick pan, because the barrels are on the other side, so you can't really see them, but just the number of barrels that are kind of stacked up in here. Hey, Steve, kick me that question.
All right. So, well, first I'm going to answer Phil's question down there in LA. Phil, it's good to hear from you, and I'm so glad you're on watching tonight, my friend. You'd asked if you're skipping mallow for your chard, what happens next instead of going to fermentation. We're going to fermentation. We're going primary fermentation. Mallow or ML or malolactic conversion is the secondary fermentation. So we will skip that part. But first, we got to go primary, or else you're just going to be drinking grape juice, and this would be really expensive Welch's. So, and we're going to definitely get into that on the November 11th session. All about
correct.
It's going to be all about malolactic conversion.
And we know that Phil really wants 100% new oak on his Chardonnay and full malolactic conversion. Joking, Phil. Yes. Joking. We know you want crisp, clean, and light. Crisp, clean, and light. Yeah, just kidding.
So, Stu, I'm going to toss this one over to you. Jim is
sure.
asking if we typically sulfite the white juice in the settling tank.
So, we're going to kind of hit the grapes with SO. So there's this thing called sulfur, and sulfur is basically a preservative. You know, at your house, if you put those strawberries in the refrigerator and you forget about them for 5 days, there's going to be a whole lot of love going on those strawberries in your refrigerator in the form of the fungus that's growing on them, that white powdery fungus. Wine is sugar is a fuel source for a lot of microbial activity. And so we'll hit it with sulfur a number of times. When the grapes first come in, we're going to hit it with about 50 parts per million. So, and that is just to prevent a spontaneous fermentation from taking place too early. Yes, we might go native with the yeast, and we usually go native for at least 48 hours, 72 hours to see the kinetics before we might hit them with a cultured strain. Somebody asked about that, and we'll get into that into the next episode. But then we'll also hit it with sulfur post-pressing, right after we press those white grapes, so that we can control when that fermentation is going to commence. But we maintain very, very low levels of SO2, about 28 parts per million. Some people say, oh, I'm allergic to sulfites, but I see them drinking a cup of coffee. We're at 28 parts per million. Your coffee is at about 80 parts per million. So if you drink coffee, you are not allergic to sulfites. If you drink tea, you are not allergic to sulfites. If you have any dried fruit, you are not allergic to sulfites. And if you've ever been to a salad bar, you're not allergic to sulfites, because you know that lettuce stays green for about 6 weeks. And that's because SO2, SO2, SO2. But we maintain very low level of art. Yeah.
And so I would say, begs the question, if people think they're allergic to sulfites, what are they allergic to?
Well, I would say most times it's in a red wine. There's a lot of compounds in red wine that people are allergic to, and they're doing a lot of research at the local university here, about an hour away, where Steve is an alum and Patrick's an alum at UC Davis, and they're trying to isolate those compounds. But it's mostly in red wine. Steve, where are you going with this? Because I'm kind of lost.
It's histamine. Sorry about that. It's histamines that are from the skins, exactly. And they are isolating which histamines in particular. And there are people that actually have like little dipsticks that you can put in your wine, and so allegedly filters them out. But anyway, getting off topic there.
You get a histemic reaction just like my wife Shelly does. So,
yeah,
hey, are you? we're tasting the, we're spiraling like Patrick. Hey, we're tasting the SB. What are you tasting? Because I can't see you. What are you tasting in the winery right now?
I'm gonna answer a couple of questions real quick, and I'm
about
to taste the rosé off the tank, which I'll get into. But Amira, good to see you on here, Amira. What causes the grapes to start macerate? What causes the grapes to start macerating on their own if you don't add anything, or do you add the yeast immediately once they go into tanks? So kind of like Stu was getting into this a minute ago, the yeast will start macerating just like I mentioned before. If you have a bowl of berries, and they'll just start breaking down basically once they're off the rake, it's off the cluster, off the plant. And there's yeast on it already. And there's yeast in the air. So if we don't add the yeast, it'll start doing it on its own to some degree. Also, somebody else asked about using different yeast. I think use a lot of different yeast here. You did cover that. But yes, we do a lot of different yeast, cultured yeast. It depends on the style that we're going for. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'll talk a little bit about the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc that I just drank most of a bottle of. I did share a little bit with my friends here. But it's fantastic. I can't wait for the 2020 Sauvignon Blanc, and I hope you guys are all enjoying it there. But I am going to get a little bit more into, sorry, I need to get that out of my hand. Stu was just pointing out and talking about, he was pulling a sample from a Sauvignon Blanc barrel, right? And you guys all saw what it looked like. So I chose our rosé. This is Tempranillo. It is totally dry. If you come over here, you can see this is called a lot code. It's the Wine Foundry 2020 Rosé -TP for Tempranillo. Brought it in on, or we racked it into this tank. Actually, we brought it in on September 2nd. Racked it into this tank after 2 days of cold settling on the 4th. 22 inches is the measurement from the top of the tank. We have 1,982 gallons of it. On the other side, we've got little buddy over here that's got the Mourvèdre. The Mourvèdre is the other component to the rosé, and we've got 851 gallons in. MB for Mourvèdre, 7.5 inches from the top. That's how we know the gallons. So on this, I'll try not to move around as much. I apologize, folks. On this, you see how cloudy it is. It's got this incredible pink color. And it's got this really big time, like guava, passion fruit, very tropical, pineapple, watermelon, almost like a Jolly Rancher watermelon. This wine is totally dry now. There's 0.0 grams per liter of sugar, glucose or fructose in it. It's entirely dry. And it's sitting on the lees, just like Stu was talking about on the Sauvignon Blanc. It's sitting on the lees in tank. And that's why it is cloudy. So those are the lees that Stu is talking about in there. After I drink this, my glass will be coated with kind of a white film from the lees. Just watch. Kidding. I'm not going to pound the whole thing, but it is really good. It's got a ways to go, obviously. What are we in, September 20-something, 23rd, 24th? And this wine will be racked off the lees again, probably around, I'd say probably right before Thanksgiving. And then we'll get it in tank. We'll blend it with the Mourvèdre, come up with the appropriate blend based on the winemaker's discretion. And then we'll blend those together, and then we'll start chilling it down to go through a process called cold stabilization. Stu, have you tried this rosé recently?
Yeah, I've tried both components. Actually, Steve, we tried it. Yes, I think you and I tried it yesterday. The days are kind of blurring together. And,
yeah, I thought we tried the Mourvèdre. My bad.
So yeah, so I did the Tempranillo. Sorry about that, and the Mourvèdre, and then hey, if we could tie something back, I don't want to go too far off, but Amira asked the question about that maceration. We could tie it back to what Patrick said in the very beginning of the episode about why we pick early in the morning. We do it because it's really cold, and if we did it under the blazing sun in the afternoon, because it's 50 degrees, 47 to 53 degrees, at 6 o'clock in the morning, but it can get up to 95, 100 degrees just a few hours later when the fog burns off. We want to get them off the vine when it's really cold and get them to the winery, because when we take them off the vine in the midday sun, those microbes are going to be really, really looking for that. They're going to, I'm anthropomorphizing the microbes, but they're ready to start fermenting. Those grapes will start fermenting straight away. So get them cold so we can get them here so we can control it better. Sorry for kind of chiming in there, but I wanted to tie it back to what Patrick said earlier.
No, that's great. That's great. I'm sure Patrick would appreciate that if he were still on the call. So we are basically right at 7 o'clock here, folks. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this to a close. Todd and Amanda, got your question. We're going to hang out. Stu and I are happy to hang out and answer any questions that still come in, and I'll address your question next. But thank you all for joining us. I hope it wasn't too glitchy. You know, this is usually Stu and I, one of us is kind of running Command Central at home while the other one's doing something in the vineyard or the winery or whatever. And so this was trying to put on maybe a bigger spectacle for you all and give you a broader look into the facility and the winemaking, and try to give you all a sense of, being here during harvest. It is really a magical time. It's a very difficult year, obviously, for a number of reasons. But it's, gorgeous blue skies. If you're able to travel, come to Napa. We'll meet you at the tasting room. We'll bring barrel samples. It'd be a lot of fun. And in the meantime, October 14th is the next episode of this series. This is a 4-part Wine Foundry Wednesday series. October 14th, October 28th, and November 11th. That'll take us all the way through. And also, for those that are on the Anarchist Wine Co. side of things, we will start our Inquisitive Sips 2-part harvest series, where we'll try not to replicate too much of the same information that we've done, but that'll be October 1st is the first one of that, I believe. I'm not getting a confirmation nod from, okay, thank you.
And then October 21st, Steve, October 21st.
Oh, 10 days before Halloween.
It is the answer on October 21st is histamine.
The book club.
Histamine. No, it is the book club, the small but mighty book club. We have a wine-centric book club. We meet every month. We choose a different topic or a different book. This month is coming up is going to be called The Botanist in the Winter by Christy Campbell, and it's about speaking of microbes, but this is a different one. This is about a little louse that we were kind enough to introduce to Europe and almost wipe out wine making. So The Botanist in the Winter, and we got a mention in Forbes, and then like 2 other people mentioned it, but we don't even know who they are. That's how popular our wine-centric book group is.
It is actually very cool. Stu, I apologize for not putting that out there. But folks, thank you so much for joining us. This will go on for a few more weeks. You can still definitely pick up a couple of the Wine Foundry Wednesdays 4-packs on the anarchistwineco.com site. We talked about Sauvignon Blanc a bit tonight. I apologize I didn't get into really tasting the 2019 because we have so many things going on and kind of wanted to share with you all. So it's going to be probably a little bit of a focus on the current stuff, but try to make it as a reference to those wines in bottle as well. So thanks for joining us. Indeed. We're going to go ahead and shut off the recording, and then Stu and I will stay on and answer some questions. Cheers, folks.
Yep. Cheers.